that is risk. Okay, but going back to my claim, the stock market. Okay, now this is how it's changed from 1985 till present. And one thing that struck me as interesting, I remember when I was invested in 1987 in the stock market. And those of you who don't remember it, the stock market was around 2,500. It fell in one day 20%. And I remember the gentleman who was helping me, my advisor, was panicking. He called me and said, you know, he didn't know what to do. He said, you know, stocks fell 20%. I mean, that's pretty big. And he was concerned what to do. Well, the thing to do was to do nothing. And sure enough, it came back. But I mean, he was fearful. Well, look at it. It's a little blip. In other words, so what this says to me, okay, we don't know if Armageddon may occur, but
2009 was close.
well, 2008 mortgage bubble. But if we go back, okay, here it was, 2008. Well, maybe it was good fortune, or maybe the Federal Reserve did some good things, or whatever it was, we did pull our fat out of the fire. But in general, I guess the point is, you can't be fearful of a lot of your investment opportunities.
You take a little patience.
Yeah, because I think in general, things have improved. Okay, it doesn't mean it'll always improve.
That market was 10 years between 2000 and 2008. I lost 10 years. 8 years.
Well, and here's an interesting thing. Some people will point to salaries. And salaries, real salary growth in the last 10 years has been kind of flat. But if you consider the man or the woman who invested in the means of capital, they didn't get flat. Theirs went up significantly. So yes, I agree. The salaries, that's a problem. It's flat with inflation and everything. But this is pretty positive. So,
You only lose money when you cash in.
right. Well, you have to be careful. So anyhow, I would say the average person will have to save more to avoid the risks that we've talked about already. So this means you want to save to defer, avoid taxes. Now we'd like to avoid taxes. There's some tricks that one can employ, but there's not many of them. I mean, outside of just cheating, and sending it to an offshore account. But you want to invest conservatively, and you want to stay healthy so that you don't have some big medical bills ruin you. And then here's the thing about Social Security. It doesn't pay to cash it out too early. So you're able to take Social Security at 62, but you generally don't want to take it until you're 66. You have to take it at 70. But the amount that you get, the amount more that you get when you wait is significant. So for those of you who are looking at that, wait at least till you're 66. I think is the best. Okay, so tax avoidance is best, but that's king. But tax deferral is also desirable. So here's a little chart that shows you what would happen if you have tax deferred growth, and if you started saving at 30, okay, and you let's see if I got in it. Oh, this is that. I guess this is the percentage growth. I forget how much money it starts with. But the point here is, if you start young and you get a high rate of return, you're going to have a lot of money. If you start late, say in your 50s, you're not going to have as much money to save. So let me talk about the risk minimization. Oh, one thing that's important to note is, remember, if you can save with no taxes, that's the best. So no taxes would be like a Roth IRA, Whole life insurance has some advantages. I'm not trying to sell it, but I mean, it has advantages. And tax deferred is okay, IRAs, 401k. And then finally, taxable. So you want to minimize risk also. I mentioned that. So the way you do this is some diversification and rebalance. And I have a little link. I don't think I'll go there because we'll run out of time. But you can transfer your risk to other companies. Okay, one of the things that you could transfer to is you can transfer to an insurance policy. Now, typically, companies like Sandy and others always offer term insurance to their employees. There's a school of thought because it's much cheaper. So if you pay for term and you invest the difference, that's what accountants like to say. But I think the thing to consider is that it is cheaper, but as you get older, the companies will charge you more. So that's the downside. So now here's my little plug about big Q and little q. You have to be careful. You have to be careful. Don't just give your money to the first guy that comes by. This is why I say if a salesman comes to you and offers something, listen. But if you're uncomfortable with it or it doesn't fit your plans, then don't do it. As a matter of fact, I heard today that people buy whole life insurances or insurance policies. 1 out of 5 stop paying within 10 years because they can't afford the premium. So you have to be very careful, whatever you're buying, to make sure you can afford it. And now we go to just a quick review of what's the Marquis and efficient frontier approach. This is a tool that financial industry uses to adjust for risk. And so I'm going to go through it very quickly. But basically what it says is that for a portfolio of investments, you have your effective rate of return and you have your uncertainty or your standard deviation. And none of these is any worse than the other. But you can see for B, you get a better rate of return for the same risk. That's all that shows you. So, but there's a threshold. What this says, when you look at the numbers, there's a threshold. You can't do better than a certain amount of return. And of course, you always have a certain degree of risk. So the way to look at it is you have an expected rate of return, and that's equal to your probability of your return times your risk. Okay, and of course, this distribution, if you look at it as a normal distribution, the width of that distribution gives you an effect of how risky it is. And so there's different assets that you have in your portfolio or your estate. You have cash, not much risk, your home, mutual funds, whatever. And so in your estate plan, you want to look at all of these. There's something called a coefficient of variation, and that's a standard deviation divided by the effective return of each of the different investments or whatever. So if you're careful with selection, diversification, you want a large sample. And by the way, I brought an article related to that. And this gives you some confidence. Wall Street Journal claims that you can invest in 3 funds with index funds. You can invest in one Vanguard fund, it's the Vanguard Total Stock, 40%, 20% in the Vanguard Total International Stock, and 40% in the Vanguard Total Bond Market Index. Now these are all index funds. That means they just invest in a set pot of stocks. There's no management, so the fees are low. And they claim this beat 5,000 variations of other investments that were managed 80% of the time over a 16-year period. So what that says to me is you don't have to have a whole bunch of different funds. You pick a few good inexpensive winners like that, and you're covered. And they will do all the rebalancing for you. Remember I talked about the rebalancing. They would cover you with that.
So it doesn't mention how many there are in total. It said it beat 5,000, but what if 80,000 beat it?
Yeah, big, how many mutual funds are there?
Well, true, but this would be my response to that. At New York Life, they used to tell me, excuse me, the chocolate cake has made my throat. They used to tell me that they have, according to Barron's, the best mutual funds per performance, and they're called the mainstay funds. But my point would be, if you're in the market at all, you don't have to be the best. You know, you've all read and heard of the explanation in the prospectuses where they say today's gain, today's performance doesn't guarantee future performance, because you can buy the best funds today and tomorrow they may not be the best. So I think the point is, don't try to chase being number one. The point is to be in it so that you're getting some kind of rate of return that's better than cash, for example. So that's what I would say about that. I agree that maybe there's something not quite right with that article, but it does show you that, and they claim in the article that those three funds have most stocks in them. You know, so they're pretty much covering the whole universe.
Two things you have to be careful about being on the absolute peak, because often what you're doing for the last few percent of return is you're hiring a manager. And if he decides to go someplace else, it may fall off rapidly.
That could be. And remember, these were index funds, these Vanguard.
Right, if it's indexed, that's a different deal.
Right. So that kind of takes the management out, but that's a good point.
The other thing that's frequently pointed out is you have to watch out for false diversity. You think you're doing good because you've got three different mutual funds with three different companies, but they all have the same mix of the same stocks.
Right. And that's good. And there's tools you can use. Schwab has some tools. Morningstar has some tools where you can check your portfolio and it'll tell you the mix. So for example, a whole bunch of people may invest in Apple. Well, you may have Apple stock, say, oh, I have 10% Apple. Well, you start looking at all these different funds, you might have 20% Apple. You know, so then you can adjust it accordingly. So this is a very quick table